Hello and welcome. In this video, I will show you the exact strategy that I did, which made me memorize the 49 processes from the process chart in PMBOK Guide 6th Edition very quickly. The process chart is your foundation, and it is also important for you to understand easily the PMBOK Guide and your upcoming PMP or CAPM exam. You'll find this process chart in page 25 of the PMBOK Guide 6th Edition, which is captioned Table 1-4, Project Management, Process Group, and Knowledge Area Mapping. I rebuilt this table here for the purpose of easy memorization the way I did, which will also help you memorize this table quickly. It is very important that you understand this process chart because this is already the skeleton of the PMBOK Guide. This is a skeleton because the subsequent discussion in the PMBOK Guide is that it takes each of these process groups, knowledge areas, processes, and then expand them in much more detail. And essentially, what this chart tells you is how PMI or the Project Management Institute wants you to manage projects. This process chart is a composition of 5 process groups, 10 knowledge areas, and 49 processes. So across the columns, we have the 5 process groups. And along the rows, we have the 10 knowledge areas. And in the intersection between them, we have the 49 processes. So essentially, each of the processes has a corresponding process groups and knowledge areas. For example, collect requirements. It is a process of planning process group and the scope management knowledge area. So for the remainder of this video, we are going to talk about how you can memorize this process chart. Please note that the PMP exam does not specifically ask a process in this chart because the questions in the exam are mostly situational or scenario-based. A scenario-based exam are mostly about situations within the process group, knowledge area, and or project management processes. So let's start the 5 process groups. The 5 process groups are initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. So these 5 process groups actually tell you sort of the timeline of when process has happened. They can also be considered the stages of the project or a phase. So your project first starts initiating, and once it has been initiated, you move into planning. And once you finish planning the task that you're going to do, then you're going to execute them. So this is when you're actually going to do the task. And then, as you're executing upon your project plan, you will monitor and control it to make sure that there is no deviation between what you plan to do and what you actually did. And once the product deliverables are completed, you move into closing down the project. It is very important for your upcoming PMP or CAPM exam to note that you cannot end the project once you finish your deliverables. You must move through the closing processes. So, the quick way for you to memorize the 5 process groups is taking the first letter of the process groups in which are IPEMC. IPEMC, initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. There are some videos that suggest incorporating made-up words or mnemonics that represent each of these process groups. For me, in my experience, these made-up words just complicate my memorization process. since my brain would be processing invented words unrelated to project management terminology, rather than direct translation. Actually, the key technique here is producing or writing this chart in paper using only the first letters, which I will explain later. This technique tends to be very effective since our brain works well with visuals in writing. Visuals have been found to improve learning by up to 400%. They affect learners on a cognitive level and stimulate imagination, therefore enabling users to process the information faster. Also, writing by hand increases memory, retention, and understanding. Now let's move on to our 10 knowledge areas, which is across the rows of the process chart. The 10 knowledge areas are integration, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resource, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder. This will be represented by letters ISSCQ, RCRPS. It should be pronounced ISSCQ, RCRPS. These are the first letters of the 10 knowledge areas, and by memorizing them, will make it so much easier for you to remember what the 10 knowledge areas are. Again, they are the integration, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resource, communications, risk, procurement, and stakeholder. Now that we know our knowledge areas and our process groups, we're now ready to move on to our processes. Now, to memorize the processes, I want to introduce you to something called the phone number technique. So, the phone number technique states that you can write out the number of processes in each of the knowledge areas, and it kind of spells out a phone number. So there are 7 processes in integration, 6 processes in scope, 6 processes in schedule, 4 processes in cost, 3 processes in quality, 6 processes in resource, 3 processes in communications, 7 processes in risk, 3 processes in procurement, and 4 processes in stakeholder. A total of 49 processes, and the phone number that you get is 766-4363-734. But it's a cool way for you to memorize how many processes are in each of the knowledge area. Okay, now the second technique you can use is called the postal code technique. So if you look across the columns, we have the process groups, and if you look at the number of processes across the process groups, it kind of spells out a postal code. So it's 2, 24, 10, 12, and 1. Again, a total of 49 processes. You know, this what helps you to double check your work. So if you forgot a process, then now you're able to narrow down where you forget the process. So that's why it's cool to memorize the phone number and the postal code. Now that we know the process group and knowledge area, let's now dive right through the 49 processes and memorize those. Let's start off with our initiating process groups. The quick way to help you memorize the 2 processes in initiating is to put in mind these 2 letters, DI. These are the first letters of the processes in the initiating, which are develop project charter and identify stakeholders. I'm not fond of using mnemonics, but if it works for you, then you may do so. I may suggest here ductile iron, dance instructor, detective inspector, etc. So that's DI, or develop project charter and identify stakeholders. By the way, For these first letters of the processes, you will not be dealing with too many words. You just want to focus on some flashwords such as develop, identify, plan, collect, define, create, sequence, estimate, determine, perform, direct, manage, acquire, implement, conduct, monitor, validate, control, and close. So that's only 19 words that you need to focus to memorize the 49 processes. Okay, let's move on to closing. I know planning comes next, but we're just going to do closing because this is really easy one. So there's only one process in closing. So for closing, you just need to remember you're closing down a project. So there's only one process in the closing. It is close project or phase. We just put C here. And then we can notice that we have a process in 3 of the 4 corners. So when you're filling out this chart, one quick thing you can do or you may do is just fill in the 3 corners before moving on to the planning, executing, and monitoring and controlling processes. So you got the 2 process groups already, right? Alright, now let the fun begin. Let's move on to the planning process group. So in the planning process group, which is our biggest process group, since we have 24 processes in it, we'll now take the first letters of each of the processes. These are D, PCDC, PDSED, PED, P, PE, P, PIPPP, PP. You have to pronounce it like that for easy memorization. Again, D, PCDC, PDSED, PED. You may pause here for a while, then continue. P, PE, P, PIPPP, PP. It should be pronounced like that to have it memorized easily. This looks like really overwhelming at first, but trust me, you will memorize it quickly that way. Please just stick with me. So, we'll now come to the most important part. It is to make sure you know what process each of the letter here represents. Going back to the flashwords I previously introduced, we will be focusing here the 9 words for this process group planning. These are develop, plan, collect, define, create, sequence, estimate, determine, identify, and perform. So, 10 words to focus on for the 24 processes in planning. The first D is in the integration management area. This is the develop project management plan process. You may notice here that each knowledge area has a process that has P as its first letter. All in all, they are 12. So, 10 of these processes have plan as its first word, and other 2, which is at-risk management knowledge area here, starts with perform. All of the processes that starts with plan or are quite intuitive. These are just composed by plan plus the knowledge area itself. Basically, you just add plan plus knowledge area. So for scope management knowledge area, it is plan scope management. Then for schedule, it is plan schedule management. Then plan cost management, plan quality management, plan resource management, plan communications management, plan risk management, plan procurement management, and plan stakeholder engagement. By the way, for stakeholder, it is engagement and not management. For the 3 P's remaining, which are in the risk management knowledge area, these 3 P's are perform qualitative risk analysis, perform quantitative risk analysis, and plan risk responses. So we are left here with CDC for scope management knowledge area, which are collect requirements, define scope, and create WPS. For schedule, D said stands for define activities, sequence activities, estimate activity durations, and develop schedule. And ED for cost management knowledge area are estimate costs and determine budget. The E for resource management knowledge area is estimate activity resources, and the I for risk management knowledge area is identify risks. Now, let's move to the executing process group. The way we can memorize all of the processes in the executing process group is by focusing on flashwords: direct, manage, acquire, develop, implement, and conduct. Notice that 5 processes here starts with manage. So, taking again the first letters of the processes here in executing and applying a rhythm, we have DM, M, ADM, M, I, C, M. Notice that there are no processes in executing for scope, schedule, and cost management knowledge areas. So follow this rhythm: DMM, ADM, MICM. So we know that M stands for manage for all processes that have M as the first letter. The remaining letters DA, DIC stands for direct, acquire, develop, implement, and conduct. So we can consider this formula for the 10 processes in executing process group: 5M plus DADIC, but focus on the rhythm DMM, ADM, MICM. Now we have the 10 processes of executing process group as direct and manage project work, manage project knowledge, manage quality, acquire resources, develop team, manage communication, implement risk responses, conduct procurements, and manage stakeholder engagement. Now that we have all our processes in execution, let's now move on to the monitoring and controlling process group. The way we can memorize all of the processes in the monitoring and controlling process group is by focusing on flashwords: monitor, control, perform, and validate. Notice that 4 processes here starts with monitor and 6 processes starts with control. So taking again the first letters of the processes here in monitoring and controlling and applying a rhythm, we have MP, BC, CCCC, MMCM. So follow this rhythm: MP, BC, CCCC, MMCM. So the formula that we can use to memorize all of the processes in the monitoring and controlling is PB plus 4M plus 6C. But don't divert from the written MP, PC, CCCC, MMCM. Now we have the 10 processes of monitoring and controlling process group as monitor and control project work, perform integrated change control, validate scope, control schedule, control costs, control quality, control resources, monitor communications, monitor risks, control procurement, monitor stakeholder engagement. Now we looked at how to memorize both the processes group and the knowledge area and the pertinent processes within the chart. Let's do a quick recap to cover what we have learned. So first, we looked at how to memorize a process group, which is using the first letter of their first word, which is IPEMC. Then, we looked at how to memorize all the knowledge areas, which is using the written pattern ISSCQ RCRPS. And then, an idea of using a phone number 766-4363-734 and postal code 224-10-12-1 were introduced to represent the numbers of processes for each of the knowledge area and process groups. And then we used DI to help us memorize the two processes within initiating, and then we looked at how to memorize the process in closing, which is just using C because there is only one process in the closing process group, and that's the close project or phase. Now, then we move our attention to the planning process groups, which is using the first letters of the 24 processes with a written D, PCDC, PDSED, TED, P, PE, P, PIPPP, P, P. And then we moved on to executing, and the way we can memorize all of the processes in the executing process group is using the first letters of the 10 processes with a written DMM, ADM, MICM. We also consider a formula 5M plus TADIC, but the focus should be on the rhythm DMM, ADM, MICM. And then finally, we moved on to monitoring and controlling process group using the first letters of 12 processes with a written MPBC, CCCC, MMCM. And the formula that we can use to memorize all of the processes within monitoring and controlling is PB plus 4M plus 6C. But the focus should be on the rhythm MPVC, CCCC, MMCM. Okay, so that's the quick recap on how you can memorize the entire process chart in your PMBOK guide. It's very important to have this chart memorized. Now, a quick note here. You should memorize the process chart, but you don't have to memorize all of the associated ITTOs or inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs for each of these processes. You just need to have a general and good understanding of them. But the chart is a good thing to be memorized. Here again is another quick preview of how you can practice writing this process chart, which is just writing the first letter of the first word of each of the 49 processes. You can also write these numbers on the right side. Do it every day, and if it becomes easy, do it twice a week. Also, you may opt not to write any more the numbers that correspond to the numbers of processes for each of the process group and knowledge area, like this. Make sure you know what process each of the letter here represents, which is the most important point. Now, if you want more tips like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell to be updated on future videos. Thank you so much. Have a great day and God bless.